Hello, I'm Dick Cavett. Few sights in the world can kindle our imagination like the flash of a lighthouse beacon in the night. Its glow along a dark horizon has guided ships past unseen dangers ever since man first ventured onto the high seas. Shore lights were used as early as 700 BC to guide the Phoenicians from the Mediterranean to the coast of Great Britain. In 247 BC, the Egyptians built the Pharos of Alexandria, a lighthouse over 400 feet tall. And its wood fire could be seen 29 miles and was considered one of the 7 wonders of the world. The science of lighthouses, phairology, is named after it. Lighthouses have evolved over the years from primitive wood and oil-burning beacons to powerful beams using sophisticated technology. And the Montauk Lighthouse is an important part of the evolution of lighthouses and of Long Island's history. It has been a principal beacon for navigation along the northeast coast for nearly 200 years. Commissioned by George Washington, it was the first lighthouse to be built in New York State and is the 4th oldest lighthouse in America still in operation. It stands on the easternmost tip of Long Island on a 75-foot bluff called Turtle Hill. The Indians of Long Island, the Montaukets, built signal fires on this hill to guide their fishermen to shore. After the colonists arrived on Long Island in 1639, America's first small boat whaling industry began here. Long Island became prosperous, trading whale oil and whalebone for goods from around the world. As trade increased, shipwrecks became common because the treacherous waters around Long Island were uncharted. Bonfires and blazing barrels of pitch were used to guide ships to port at night. But land pirates, called mooncussers, used the same method to lure unsuspecting ships to their doom. Local merchants and ship owners, tired of losing valuable cargoes, began demanding lights near important ports of trade and where there were serious dangers to navigation. In all, 12 lighthouses were built in colonial America before the Revolutionary War. But the war brought a halt to the building of lighthouses, and many of the existing lights were destroyed. During the Revolution, eastern Long Island and Montauk Point were occupied by the British. A huge fire was kept burning at Montauk Point to serve as a beacon for the British Navy. After the war, Long Island was left in disastrous condition, and it took until 1788 for a semblance of its former prosperity to return. As trade increased, so did the number of shipwrecks, and shattered hulls of brigs, ketches, and schooners lay in the surf along the exposed beaches of Long Island. It became apparent that a lighthouse at Montauk Point was sorely needed. One New York merchant said, "Upon the whole, I can't have a doubt upon my mind that a light upon Montauk would give the most universal relief and satisfaction." In 1792, Congress authorized construction of a lighthouse at Montauk Point. Its chief purpose would be to serve as a landfall light for ships sailing from Europe to New York. It would guide intercoastal trading ships to the ports of Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, and serve as a landmark within the Sound. At the request of the Treasury Department, Ezra Lomdieu of the New York Chamber of Commerce prepared a survey of Montauk Point. He chose to locate the lighthouse on Turtle Hill, a flat plateau 297 feet from the bluff. He noted that as the bank is washed by the sea in storm and washes away very fast, it is best to set the building at this distance. In 1795, President George Washington hired John McComb, Jr., a prominent New York architect, to construct the Montauk Point Lighthouse for the sum of $22,300. There was some reluctance by the proprietors of Montauk to sell the property. They feared that Connecticut fishermen would build shelters on the lighthouse reservation and raid their livestock. The site was eventually deeded to the federal government for $250, but with the provision that no buildings other than those associated with the lighthouse could ever be built on the property. In May of 1796, John McComb, Jr., with a crew of 50 workmen, began construction. They built a road from the beach to the top of Turtle Hill for carting material. And on June 7, 1796, the first stone of the foundation of the lighthouse was laid 13 feet below the surface of Turtle Hill. The 80-foot high octagonal tower was built of brown sandstone from Connecticut. The tower was 29 feet in diameter and 9 feet thick at the foundation, tapering to a diameter of 16 feet 6 inches and a thickness of 3 feet at the top. 7 pairs of wooden stairs led to an octagonal iron lantern, which was 10 feet high and 10 feet 9 inches in diameter. The lantern was topped with a dome 5 feet 9 inches in height and fitted with sashes, each having 28 panes of glass. A copper ventilator, shaped like a man's head, was placed on top of the lantern to vent the smoke from the lamp. A vault containing 9 200-gallon cedar cisterns for fuel storage was set into a bank 30 feet from the tower. A frame dwelling was built for the keeper at the foot of Turtle Hill, and a well was dug. Shortly after construction began, rain caused 3 or 4 bad gullies to form on the hill near the lighthouse, threatening to undermine the foundation. As a result, Macomb constructed stone dams across the gullies and dumped loose stones behind the dams in an effort to control the erosion. The lighthouse was completed in 1796, only 5 months after construction began, but it was going to be a while before the light was actually lit. The ship carrying the panes of glass and the oil for the lighthouse had gone aground at Napeague. It wasn't until spring that the oil was delivered and the replacement glass for the lantern arrived. In March of 1797, Jacob Hand, the first keeper, lit the lamp and the Montauk Lighthouse began operation. The first lighting device consisted of 8 separate copper lamps hung in 2 tiers and consumed 5 gallons of whale oil every night. It produced a great deal of smoke and soot, hazing over the glass of the lantern and dimming the light. In 1806, the 8 lamps were replaced with a spider lamp, which consisted of a single reservoir of oil with 32 spouts. It was invented by Josiah Hand, the assistant keeper at Montauk. The spider lamp gave off acrid fumes that burned the eyes and nostrils of the keeper, curtailing the length of time he could remain in the lantern. Yet the spider lamp was used at Montauk Point and in other American lighthouses for many years. In 1812, Winslow Lewis, an unemployed ship captain, persuaded the federal government to replace the spider lamp with his copy of an argand lamp set in parabolic reflectors. The argand lamp produced a steady, smokeless flame which revolutionized lighthouse illumination. Congress hired Lewis to install his lighting system in all 49 of the country's lighthouses. The lantern at Montauk Point was fitted with Lewis's patent lamp in November of 1812. All but 9 of the country's lighthouses were fitted with the new lamp and reflectors when the War of 1812 interfered. During the war, the British occupied Long Island and confiscated the Montauk Lighthouse, forcing the keeper and his family to leave. When the war ended in 1814, the lighthouse was returned to American control and was soon guiding an increasing number of trading ships along our coast. After the war, Lewis completed the installation of his patent lamp in the remainder of the country's lighthouses. The lamps and reflectors he installed were of poor quality and did not hold up well under normal use, causing a decline in the quality of the lights in America. In 1820, the lighthouse system was put under the direction of Stephen Pleasanton. Under his guidance, the quality of the lights declined further. Keepers were given few instructions, and the tower at Montauk Point suffered serious deterioration from a lack of maintenance and repair. A publication called the American Coast Pilot launched a heavy attack upon Pleasanton and Lewis. It described the poor state of the lamps in the United States and cited Montauk Point as an example. As a result, Congress began investigating the Fresnel lens, an optical system which had revolutionized lighthouses in Europe. They found it to be vastly superior to Lewis's patent lamps, but in spite of this, Pleasanton and Lewis reported that they had improved their lighting system and ordered it installed in the Montauk Point light. Not surprisingly, the quality of the improved system was terrible, and by 1851, the lights in the United States gave this country a third-rate lighthouse service. By this time, Congress had become completely dissatisfied with Pleasanton's poor management and created the Lighthouse Board. Plans were developed revolving around the adoption of the Fresnel lens. Lighthouses were to be classified based on the 6 orders of Fresnel lenses. Standard plans for towers, lanterns, lamps, and keepers' dwellings were to be developed. Lighthouse keepers were to be trained, military discipline adopted, and regular inspections scheduled to see that the lights were properly attended and maintained. Montauk Point was to be one of 3 first-order lighthouses planned for the south shore of Long Island. The other 2 were to be located at Shinnecock and Fire Island. Before the Fresnel lens could be installed at Montauk Point, an inspection found that the tower was badly cracked and in need of rebuilding. The Lighthouse Board decided to install the Fresnel lens temporarily in the original tower until a new tower could be built. 6 years later, after minimal repairs, the first-order Fresnel lens was installed at Montauk Point, bringing a dramatic change in the brightness and reliability of the light. The new lens stood 172 feet above sea level and could be seen 24 miles using only 1 lamp instead of the 18 previously used. The Fresnel lens was shaped like a cone of prisms, 12 feet high and 6 feet in diameter. Clockworks, activated by an 80-pound weight, which required winding every 3 hours, revolved a flash panel around the lens every 2 minutes, changing the characteristic of the light from a fixed beam to a flashing signal. The change in the light was responsible for a terrible shipwreck. There was no way to inform the ships at sea that the Montauk light had been changed to a flashing signal and that a new lighthouse with a steady beam had been constructed 35 miles to the west at Shinnecock. When Captain Ephraim Harding sailed the John Milton along the coast of Long Island in February 1858, there was no way for him to know that the lights had been changed 6 weeks before. A strong snow gale was blowing and visibility was poor. He took bearings on what he believed to be the steady beam of the Montauk Point light, not knowing it was the new Shinnecock light. He was far short of his course when he brought the ship about and headed north into what he thought was open sea. The John Milton crashed on the rocks at Montauk right after dawn. No one was saved. There were some near misses after the tragedy of the John Milton, but news of the change in the characteristic of the light at Montauk soon became known. The Fresnel lens remained in its temporary quarters for 2 years until the Lighthouse Board decided to renovate the original tower rather than replace it. In June of 1860, a crew of 12 men began rebuilding the Montauk Lighthouse to the standard of a first-order light station. The sandstone tower was strengthened and raised 14 feet to provide a service room below the lantern for the pedestal and revolving apparatus, and a watch room for the keeper who had to tend the lamps of the new Fresnel lens throughout the night. A larger lantern room was placed on top of the taller tower. The rotted interior was gutted, and an iron stairway was built in a new circular brick stairwell. New iron decks, casement sashes, and main balcony doors were installed. An oil storage house was built at the base of the tower, and a double dwelling was constructed for the keeper and his 2 assistants. A covered passageway was built connecting the keeper's dwelling with the oil house and tower, making it easier for the keepers to change watches during the night. After the installation of the Fresnel lens in the rebuilt tower, the Montauk Point Lighthouse was kept in good repair. The presence of 3 keepers provided a good workforce, even allowing the tower to be whitewashed every year without outside help. Although we generally associate the mournful sound of a foghorn with lighthouses, the Montauk Point Lighthouse was without a fog signal until 1873. The first fog signal installed was a Day-Bowl compressed air trumpet powered by 2 steam engines. In 1897, this air trumpet was replaced with a dual siren fog signal, and an oil engine house was built for the engines and compressors that powered it. At the close of the 19th century, the 3rd District Lighthouse engineer made a proposal to change the characteristic of the Montauk Lighthouse. He believed that 2 minutes was too long a time for a mariner to wait between flashes and wanted the interval shortened to a maximum of 15 seconds. He also wanted to give all flashing lights a distinguishing day mark, and in the spring of 1900, a brown band was painted on the tower of the Montauk Light. Shortening the flash interval did not take place until 1903, prompted by the breakdown of the flashing apparatus. The entire first-order Fresnel lens was replaced with a 3.5-order bivalve lens, which exhibited a flashing light every 10 seconds. It consisted of two 54-inch bullseye lenses standing back to back and was equipped with a mineral oil air pressure lamp, which produced 3 times the candle power of the larger first-order lens. In 1907, a new third-order vapor lamp was placed in the lens, which dramatically increased the intensity of the light. This incandescent oil vapor lamp was the last stage of the refinement of the flame as a lighthouse illuminant. It remained in use until the light was electrified. Electric power lines reached the lighthouse in 1938, when the keeper's dwelling was equipped with lights and indoor plumbing. In 1939, the lighthouse service was taken over by the Coast Guard. The modern era began for the Montauk Point Lighthouse in 1940, when the light was electrified and a radio beacon was established at the station. Though the light was electrified, the clockwork which revolved the light was not, requiring the keeper to wind the 80-pound weight every 3 hours, thus ensuring the lamp would be tended throughout the night. During World War II, the Montauk Lighthouse became part of the Eastern Coastal Defense Shield. The U.S. Army took control of the lighthouse and manned it from 1943 to 1946. Its primary role was one of surveillance, and not as an aid to navigation. It burned only a 100-watt bulb when it was in service for fear of guiding German U-boats to shore. A fire control tower was constructed in front of the lighthouse. Spotters in the tower coordinated artillery fire to cannons located at Fort Hero, situated 500 meters west of the lighthouse. At the end of World War II, Fort Hero was deactivated and the gun installations were ripped out. In 1946, the United States Coast Guard took over the maintenance and lighting of the Montauk Lighthouse, ending the tradition of the civilian keeper.
Even though the Coast Guard took over control of the lighthouse service in 1939, it wasn't until 1946 that Coast Guard personnel were assigned to the lighthouse here at Montauk Point. Now, instead of a permanent civilian keeper, the Coast Guard petty officer and his crew lived at the light and maintained the aids to navigation. It wasn't until 1961 that the gas oil lamp was replaced with an electric lamp. An electric motor was installed to revolve the lens, freeing the keeper from the difficult task of raising the heavy weights. On February 3rd, 1987, Montauk Point Lighthouse was automated. The 3.5-order bivalve lens was replaced with a DCB 224 aero beacon with two 1,000-watt lamps, which gave it a 19-mile range. It also flashed every 5 seconds. Each drum of the rotating DCB 224 optic has two 1,000-watt lamps. In case of failure of one lamp, the other one will automatically switch into position. Besides that, there's also a 190 millimeter emergency lantern in case there's a complete power failure here at the lighthouse. Although it's made of plastic, it has the same lighting characteristic as the glass Fresnel lens. This is the signal control room, which is the heart of the modern automated lighthouse. These blue boxes behind me are the power supplies for the new electronic sound signal. They replace the air compressor motors for the old dayball sound signal. This is the fog detector, which emits a strobe light, which is refracted back into an optic, which indicates the presence of moisture in the air, thus indicating fog. Through its control panel, it'll energize the power supplies to turn on the fog signal. This is the aid control monitor system equipment. It contains relays and monitors which controlled all aspects of the lighthouse operation. This equipment basically does all the functions that were normally done by personnel stationed here at the lighthouse.
With the automation of the light and fog signal, the presence of a keeper at the Montauk Light was no longer necessary. But the lighthouse keeper will always be a part of our maritime lore. In the early days at Montauk, a keeper's only company was his family, the few Indians who remained in the area, and the herders who tended the cattle and sheep pastured in Montauk. The isolation was particularly hard and the winters were dreary and lonely. The weather at Montauk Point could be vicious, and the keeper and his family were often exposed to danger from storms that swept the coast. When Patrick Gould, the lighthouse keeper, went into town for supplies, his wife had to keep the light overnight. Once it was so rough and windy, she had to go up the hill to the lighthouse on her hands and knees to keep from being blown off the point. In the early days at the lighthouse, the keepers were often called upon to perform rescue work, and several of the lighthouse keepers performed heroic feats in saving people from the surf. When the brig Flying Cloud was wrecked on the rocks at Montauk in December of 1856, the keeper, Patrick Gould, climbed down the face of the bluff in the gale and pulled her crew from the surf. It was a lonely life and a hard one, but there were good times too. In summer, the lighthouse keeper and his wife could take paying guests. It was an adventurous outing for a party to go on Montauk for a day or two. In pre-motor car days, it took 6 hours in good weather to drive a horse and wagon from East Hampton to the point, a distance of 20 miles. The daughter of the last civilian keeper at Montauk, Margaret Buckridge Bach, describes living conditions when they moved to the lighthouse in 1930. We had 4 floors on the keeper's side of the house. There were 2 big bedrooms on the second floor, my parents' bedroom and living room on the first floor, and the kitchen and dining room in the basement. We had a small garden outside the kitchen, but nothing grew too well in the sand. The first and second assistant keepers, she wrote, shared the other half of the house. The keepers worked in 12-hour shifts, 12 on and 24 off, plus every morning except Sunday. During the day, we covered the light with a linen cloth to protect it from the sun. The tower was open to visitors every day except Sunday, and it was the responsibility of the keeper on duty to walk up and down the stairs with each group. The visitors were not allowed to touch the lens, but someone always managed to do so. In foggy weather, the fog engines would sometimes run steadily for a week to 10 days. All the pictures on our walls would be crooked from the vibration, and when the horns finally stopped, it seemed as though the world had suddenly come to an end. In the spring, the migrating birds attracted by the light would crash against the tower. One year, I buried over 100 of these dead birds. We never did have a telephone, except for the Coast Guard phone, but this was strictly for emergency use. Today, there are keepers at only a few of the roughly 500 lighthouses still standing in the United States, and these keepers too will soon be phased out, ending a tradition that has safeguarded sailors and added tales of heroic feats to our maritime lore. Recognizing the historical significance of the Montauk Point Lighthouse, the Montauk Historical Society leased the lighthouse from the Coast Guard in 1987. They have documented the history of the lighthouse and have begun restoring the buildings to their original plans. Erosion is still a problem, with only 50 feet of the original 297 remaining between the lighthouse and the Atlantic. During World War II, the Army Corps of Engineers installed massive boulders at the base of the bluff to diminish the effects of the pounding surf. The federal government installed a gabion wall and terracing in the 70s, which handled the most destructive forces of the ocean, but the action of storms, tides, prevailing winds, and rain still caused big hunks of the bluff to come sliding down. In 1970, Georgina Reed, a professional photographer, heard about the erosion problems at the Montauk Lighthouse and single-handedly began the task of stabilizing the bluff. She won the support of the Coast Guard, who funded her work, and she spent every weekend for nearly 20 years traveling back and forth from her home to work on the east face of the bluff. By using her patented method of terracing and planting, she successfully stopped erosion on this section of the bluff. The unterraced section of the bluff continues to erode, and unless work can be completed, the lighthouse is in imminent danger of tumbling into the sea. The New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, along with the Montauk Historical Society, have initiated a Save the Montauk Lighthouse project. Erosion control is a top priority, and work on the bluff is an ongoing process, as well as maintenance, historical preservation, and educational programs. The funding for this work, except for a grant from the state of New York, is raised through private donations and from special events like the Paul Simon concert held in Montauk in 1990. The Montauk Lighthouse is part of America's past, and the original document authorizing the construction of the lighthouse by George Washington is on display in the Lighthouse Museum, along with a lot of other interesting artifacts. As we look at the Montauk Lighthouse, keeping its noble vigil, it's easy to imagine what inspired the poet Walt Whitman to write, "I stand as on some mighty eagle's beak, eastward the sea absorbing, viewing nothing but sea and sky, the tossing waves, the foam, the ships in the distance, the wild unrest, the snowy curling caps, that inbound urge and urge of waves, seeking the shores forever." You can help save the lighthouse by sending your donations to the following address: Save the Lighthouse Fund, Post Office Box 2306, Montauk, New York 11954.